So I was complimenting those that were here because this is not an easy topic, so thank you for coming and being open. Hi, welcome. Thank you for coming and being open to learning a little bit about something that isn't an easy topic to talk about or think about. But what I'm so excited about, and the reason I love doing what I do, is when you leave here, you are going to have a real flip switch in your head about what you thought hospice was about and what it really is about. So you know that there are lots of ribbons for different organizations, Support Your Troops and breast cancer, and the National Hospice Organization has a ribbon. Can you read what that says? It's about how you live. What do most people think hospice is? Dying. Right, exactly. The reason that is such a perfect tagline for hospice is that every hospice provider will tell you, we're not helping people die, we're helping people live until they die. This is the hospice ribbon right here on my chest, and my website is it'sabouthowyoulive.com. So I just really believe that you are going to be so relieved, and again, your brain is going to take a real flip in the next little bit about what hospice is and what it isn't. So why do I get to stand here and talk to you about this? I'm going to take 2 seconds simply to say I worked in hospice for 13 years. The first 8, I educated the general community. In the last 5 years, I educated I had 2 hospitals and 70 doctor's offices. And I thought, oh, well, you know, the medical professionals know it. They get it. Oh, Lordy, they do not. And what was so wonderful is I educated the family medicine residents that came through Wake Forest Medical School in North Carolina. And when they left time with me, the look on their faces was of sheer relief and, oh, I don't have to feel like a failure because I couldn't cure death, and now I know how to make sure the family doesn't feel like I gave up on them. And so it's just been extremely rewarding. There's a thing called Virtual Dementia Tour that's a physical experience. Have you been through it?
I teach it.
Oh, good. Perfect. So if anybody has not been through that and you have a loved one with dementia, I really encourage you to find somebody in your community that is a facilitator. It's you're going to be garbed with your feet, your hands, your eyes, and your ears. So it is a sensory experience that gives you a little bit of an idea of what it might be like to have dementia, and it is very emotional. So just know that. And then I'm also certified in Powerful Tools for Caregivers. If you haven't heard of that, it's a nationwide evidence-based program. It's 6 weeks, usually about 90 minutes once a week. It doesn't teach the caregiver how to take care of their loved one. It teaches the caregiver how to take care of themselves. So I highly recommend that. There's not a fee for either one of those things. And I'm certified in Respecting Choices, which is about advanced care planning. About a year ago, I did a telesummit with 21 experts, 1 from Canada, 20 from the U.S., and I thought, well, I'll have people register from the U.S. and Canada, and I had people from 25 countries register. So you can listen to those interviews free of charge on my website. And then my book is over there, and you can buy it if you want to, but my gift to you today for coming to this session is I'm going to send, if you're willing to give me your email address, I will send you a free PDF of my chapter called People Hate Talking About Dying. And it's about much of what we're going to talk about today. So I recommend you don't take notes, just listen, be present, and you're going to get all of this in that chapter that I can email you. Okay. Why do we have to talk about this? Well, I'm a baby boomer. I don't know how many people in the room are baby boomers, but okay, a lot of us. 10,000 of us turn 65 every single day, and our new name is the Silver Tsunami. So the reason I educate medical professionals about this is they're going to be doing a lot of this kind of conversation in the next 20, 30 years. And so as uncomfortable as they are with it, because they go to medical school to learn how to diagnose, treat, and cure, they're going to be doing a lot of end-of-life conversations simply because we have an aging population. So it's so important that they get comfortable having these conversations so they don't feel like a failure if they couldn't cure death, and they can do it in such a way that the family doesn't feel like they gave up on them. And I usually use the analogy of a relay race. Have you ever watched a relay race and the first 3 legs, they're killing it, and you know they're going to win. And then as that 3rd leg passes the baton to the 4th leg, they drop it. And you're like, oh my God, they just blew it. Well, I don't want my medical provider to drop the baton as he's handing me over to my end-of-life care experts. I need that to be done in a very confident, comfortable, compassionate way. so that there's a beautiful continuum of care where you took care of me for the first 50 years of my life. Now I've got this illness, this life-limiting illness, and I need that to be handled in a very confident, compassionate, knowledgeable way. So you have seen this. You know that we have an aging population. Doctors hate talking about dying. All of us hate talking about dying, but doctors really hate talking about dying. Do you think he's got a couple of months? Probably maybe an hour or two, I don't know. 70% of the time, doctors are more optimistic about the estimated end of life. Now, nobody really knows when we're going to die. Just the big guy upstairs knows. But they're going to give their best educated guess. Now, every doctor's crystal ball is very foggy, so it is a best estimated guess. But they typically are too optimistic about estimated end of life. And so part of this as caregivers and as just human beings that one day might require hospice care, not everybody's appropriate, and we'll get into that in a little bit. But I do want you to be your own advocate for your own care so that when somebody's suggesting to do something and that's really not what you want, then you can speak up and say, thank you, no, I think I'm going to do a different path. So these are all the hot topics with baby boomers, and today we're only going to go over 2 of them. Now, I attended this lovely lady. What's your first name? I can't remember. Helen. I attended Helen's session yesterday on advanced care planning, and I actually attended a couple others that touched on it. How many people so far have been to a session at this conference about advanced care planning? Okay, a couple of you have not. I will touch on it to some degree, but I'll probably focus a little bit more on hospice because I think I may be one of the only sessions that is about hospice care. So benefits of talking about this. How many, either in your family or you know a family member, that because they didn't have these conversations long before the situation, infighting, don't you dare do that to my mom, okay? And some people aren't talking today, years later, because of it. So the reason you want to have these conversations well in advance of a situation is so that you're not wringing your hands and guessing and wondering. And I will tell you this, Helen, right? Helen can probably confirm, our grief counselors will tell you they can tell when the conversations have been had in advance and when they have not. Because when they have not, there's a lot of guilt. I don't know if I did what she wanted me to do. So that's why we need to talk about these things. And it could be the most meaningful conversation you'll ever have with your loved one. So we had a conversation right before it started, and she said her mother wasn't appropriate for hospice. And I said, why do you say that? She said, well, because she was never diagnosed with 2 months or less. Isn't that what you said? Okay. So there are 2 things that make you eligible or appropriate for hospice. One is an estimated end of life of 6 months or less, and you're no longer seeking curative treatment. And a big myth that everybody thinks is hospice is only about cancer. Cancer is typically about 1/3 of hospice patients. So lots of other things, Alzheimer's, COPD, congestive heart failure, just a ton of life-limiting illnesses. But I'm going to use cancer as an easy example. Let's say I have cancer, and I have a 6-month or less prognosis. That makes me eligible for hospice. But I decide I'm going to fight it. I'm going to do chemo, radiation, I'm going to stand in my head, I'm going to do whatever I have to do to fight this thing till I take my last breath. I'm eligible for hospice because I have a 6-month or less prognosis, but I'm not appropriate because I've chosen curative treatment. And that's my right. I get to do that. So 6-month or less prognosis, no longer seeking curative treatment if there is a cure. Like COPD, there is no cure. So, okay. There's a root word, hospice and palliative care is a specialty, just like cardiology is for heart, oncology is for cancer. The palliative piece of hospice care, the root word palliate means to ease, and I think I might have a slide on that. Yes, I do. So the root word palliate means to ease. So if you go to the doctor and you're going to get your tooth pulled and they numb your mouth, that's palliative care, okay? Pain and symptom management. And the analogy or the kind of visual I like to give people, if I can hear me without the mic, I want you to imagine this big circle that's palliative care, anything that is pain and symptom management. And then within that circle, I need you to imagine a smaller circle called hospice. 6 months or less prognosis, no longer seeking curative treatment. All of hospice is palliative, but not all of palliative is hospice. Does that make sense? Okay. Fabulous. So palliative. These are some of the things that you can do for your loved one to provide palliative care. It's anything pain and symptom management. Now, if you have a bad neck, you got a neck ache, you got a hip ache, you need to go to the pain clinic. So palliative care in most hospices, and by the way, everybody thinks there's this one big huge hospice and they're all kind of related somehow, some way. The analogy I use is the faith community. So all churches are in the faith community, but they're all separate and independent, and that's how hospices are. So there are 5,300 Medicare accredited hospices in the U.S. I live in a community that's about 300,000 people, and there are 13 separate hospices that serve that community. So wherever you live, you might think hospice as a generic term like Kleenex, but I need you to investigate what are the hospices that serve your community, what are the differences. Not all of them are going to have a hospice home. That's fine. You don't have to have a hospice home to be a hospice. You do have to provide in-home care to be a hospice. So a lot of people think hospice is a place. It's not a place. The vast majority of our patients are cared for in their own home, just like your mom. So just understand there are lots of hospices, and if you've seen one hospice, you've seen one hospice. Would you agree? So there are 4 core services they have to offer, and we'll talk about those. But just understand, if you thought my loved one's going to go to hospice, there's lots of hospices. You need to figure out which one is appropriate for you, and there's lots of reasons why. So you go to the doctor in the hospital for medical care. Well, we are absolutely interested in your medical needs, but we're equally interested in your emotional, spiritual, and social needs. And once you involve hospice, you have a host of services. The doctor, the nurse, complementary therapies like music therapy that we were talking about, volunteers. This gentleman's going through volunteer training right now. My mother was a big movie freak, and she had volunteers come to watch her movies with her because they were just flipping endless. She loved Thornbirds. She fancied herself as Rachel Ward because she kind of looked a little bit like her. And I mean, it was just all the time, one after the other, just repeat. And I started calling it her granny porn because it was just killing me. Anyway, when I signed that dotted line for hospice care for my mother, that was the most emotional, hard thing I've ever had to do. But after I did that, that's when the magic happened. That's when all this love and support, and this whole conference is about supporting you as a caregiver. You have no idea the support you're going to get from the whole hospice team once you invite them in to help. And that's a hard thing for a caregiver to do. A hospice nurse went out to a family, to their home. The gentleman was in hospice care. She knocks on the door, and the wife comes, who's the caregiver, and she said, I'm good, we got this. We're good. And she wouldn't let her in. So the hospice nurse leaves. Next week she comes, I'm good, totally good. Hospice nurse leaves. Next week, I'm good, got it handled. The nurse is walking out to their car, and here comes that lady crying, running down the driveway going, I can't do this anymore. I need your help. So it's hard to ask for help. I love this Native American medicine woman. Her name's Robin Lynn White Star Woman. And every year there's a theme. I don't know if you know that about the Native American tradition, but every year there's a theme. And in 2010, the theme was true generosity. And Nicole talked about this a little bit in the keynote this morning. So it's absolutely important to give, but it's equally important to receive. And I'll give you an example. Have you ever offered to do something for a friend who needed some, and they said, no, I'm good. Didn't it kind of hurt your heart just a little bit that they said no? They wouldn't let you help? So they're being stingy because they're robbing you of your joy of helping. So that's a lesson caregivers need to learn is don't say as a supportive friend, let me know what I can do for you. Because their brain is so in a brain freeze, they don't know up from down, and they're not going to be able to tell you what to do. So if your gift is mowing lawns, then say, I'd like to mow your lawn this Friday. Or if it's cooking, I'm going to bring you dinner on Wednesday. Would that be okay? Whatever your gift is, don't ask them, what can I do for you? Because they can't think straight to know. There was a gentleman he was a young spouse, wife had cancer, they had 2 little kids. He thought he was going crazy because he went to the grocery store to get peanut butter, and he stood there for 5 minutes unable to figure out what kind of peanut butter he wanted. And he thought he was losing his mind. But you know, I don't need to tell you all this, you know, you lose all focus, you can't make a decision, you can't work your way out of a wet paper bag. Anyway, there's tons of support once you get hospice involved. And let me say this, so to your point with your mom, estimated end of life is 6 months or less. We give such great care that oftentimes that person lives to be there 6 months down the road. Now we're at 6 months down the road. As long as the doctor continues to estimate, I think we're in a 6-month window, it rolls forward. Now, on the other side of that, some people perk up. It's very common for people to perk up, and typically it's a temporary perk up. But sometimes they perk up so much to where the doctor says, I can't say 6 months or less. They're doing great. And when that happens, when the doctor can no longer estimate 6 months, they have to discharge the person. It's like you can't just go to the hospital and say, I want a bed, and jump in a bed when you don't really need a hospital bed. I mean, it doesn't work that way. Same with hospice. If they can't say 6 months or less, you must be discharged. So a story related to that is a woman came in our care at 101 years old. She died at 104. And in that time period, we discharged her 3 times. She kept perking up to the point where the doctor said, she's doing great. I can't say 6 months or less. And so she was discharged 3 times in 3 years. Okay, art therapy. We were talking about music therapy. Art therapy is one of the complementary therapies that not all hospices will offer, but many will. And this was a 5-year-old boy who lost his twin. Does that make sense? Do we see this big, huge void on one side? Have you ever heard people say that kids don't get it? I think he got it. Don't you think he got it? I think he got it. This was done by a 15-year-old boy who lost his dad. And after the loss, somebody in the family said, well, you know, you're the man of the family now. And that 15-year-old was like, I'm feeling a lot of pressure. I feel like I have to be Superman, but you know what? I don't feel like being Superman. I'm really sad. I've lost my dad. And when his mother saw this piece of clay, it's like this big, she had no clue. She had no idea that's how he was feeling until she saw that piece of art. This was done by one of our pediatric patients with spina bifida. And she said when she imagined herself as a mermaid, it didn't really matter that her legs didn't work quite right. And she loved her cat, and she wanted her cat to be a mermaid too. So there's absolutely no fee, at least for the hospice I was associated with for those 13 years. There was no fee for people to work with our art therapists and our music therapists and grief counseling. Let's say you lost somebody that lives in Chicago, but you live in Winston-Salem, North Carolina. Well, you're grieving, so the hospice where you're living will often offer you free grief counseling, even if they didn't care for your loved one. Hospices will let you utilize their complimentary services at no fee. But again, you've seen one hospice, so you need to investigate the hospices that are in your area and see what services are available to you. So there are 4 levels of care, and you just talked about a couple of them. A lot of people think, like I said, hospice is a place that you go. It's a brick and mortar house where you go. 80% of us say we want to die at home. So most people are cared for in their own home. That's the number one thing we do is routine home care, and that's what your mother's getting. Some people, some hospices have a hospice home, and so why would you go there? Well, let's say we're caring for your loved one at home, but then something's kind of out of control, beyond what the family can handle, out of control pain or vomiting or whatever the case may be. Well, now they need a higher level of care, and it would be great if they could be in a 24/7 situation where there's staff, skilled staff. So if the hospice has a hospice home, then that's a reason to go to the hospice home. Now, just like a hospital, the goal is to get you stabilized and get you back home where you want to be. Now, many people will die in the hospice home, and that's perfectly fine. But their goal is to get you stabilized and get you back home, if that's possible. Third level of care is continuous care, the very same situation. Caring for the loved one at home, something's kind of out of control, beyond what anybody can handle in the house. But this is the patient that never wanted to leave their house. So remember, 80% of us say we want to die at home. Well, this is the person that they don't even go to the hospice home temporarily. They do not want to leave their home. That was my mother. Wild horses would not drag her out of her house. So a nurse, an RN, will come to your home, and instead of a routine visit, they stay. And there are shifts to make sure it's 24/7 until things stabilize. And when things stabilize, it goes back to routine home visits. Often what's going on is this person is actively dying. And so for that person that never wanted to leave their home, this is like our best last gift that we can give them, because there's going to be a nurse right there with them. All hospices should offer continuous care. It is one of the 4 requirements. Not all do. So again, research your hospice and make sure they offer these standard services. These are all 4 required levels of care. Let me back up to general inpatient. If you're a hospice that does not have a brick and mortar hospice home, then you license with long-term care facilities or the hospital, or you must in some way, shape, or form be able to offer general inpatient for the heightened skilled needs. The last level of care is what you're taking advantage of right now, so you can be here, respite care. And a lot of people don't realize hospices offer this. So patient could be doing great. They're cooking with gas. They feel super. But the caregiver's about to fall on the floor, which all of you, I'm sure, at some point or other feel like you could fall on the floor. So she could come to this conference. Her mom is currently in respite care with hospice. She doesn't qualify to be there medically, but respite care is one of the 4 levels of care so that the caregiver can take a break. It's typically up to 5 days. Is yours up to 5 days? So she's at the conference. Maybe she wanted to go to the beach for a few days. Maybe she just needed 5 days to breathe and do her thing. So just know that that is available, and all hospices should offer all 4 levels of care. Do you have anything to add to that?
Did they tell you they don't? Do not use them.
That's right.
Because they're violating a federal regulation if they cannot or do not provide.
That's right. And here's another thing. We've got a hospice in my area who doesn't have a brick and mortar hospice home, and they tell people, when they say, well, what if I want a hospice home, like, oh, we've got agreements with the hospice home so we can take care of that. No. A hospice is not going to do a contract with another hospice.
There are some sites that do that. It's very unusual.
Very unusual.
Because we're super competitive.
That's right.
So usually an inpatient unit or a hospice home only takes in their own patients.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And did that make you go, ugh, when she just said we're super competitive? That just feels yucky, doesn't it? So here's the thing. We've got this aging community. There's tons of people to care for. They all need our care, lots of it to go around. But hospices, think of it like hospitals. Like, we have 2 major hospitals where I live, and they're very, very competitive. Everybody wants to care for your loved one. Well, that's how hospices are. They all want to care for your loved one. But, let me put it this way. There was a hospice in San Diego, large, I want to say 400 inpatient community. I mean, that's huge. That's almost like that's like a hospital. Anyway, they were admitting people to their hospice home that did not qualify for that heightened level of care, and they got their license pulled. That's why I say you can't just go jump in a bed at the hospital because you want to. You can't just go to a hospice home just because you want to. There has to be a heightened skilled need that supports that higher level of care. And then there's go ahead.
Can I just say something as well? You can change hospice anytime.
Yes. Here, I'm going to put this out here just
You can change your hospice provider at any time. It's your choice.
That's right. The reason this is important is this is being recorded for people that are listening virtually and for you to listen later. So it is important that we use these mics. Yes, absolutely. So in the case where somebody said, "Oh, we can hook you up with an inpatient facility if the time comes that that's what you need," and then they realize, well, that's not your thing. You don't have that kind of capability. They would discharge that patient, and then the hospice with it, hospice home enrolls them in their services. But what a pain in the tail for the family to go through to do all that gymnastics. I mean, that's craziness.
You can do a transfer.
Use your mic. Please use the mic.
You can do a transfer, like what you're talking about, if you want to change agencies, and then that way the family doesn't have to deal with all the admission,
Yeah.
discharge stuff, because it is time consuming. It's also really expensive for the hospice agencies to admit and discharge. So you can request a transfer, and the burden of the work is on the hospice agency to get you the transfer coordinated. But absolutely, it's the patient's right to choose which agency.
And so typically this happens when people didn't realize there was more than one hospice in their community. So you now know, and you're going to go home and tell everybody you know with a beating heart that there are multiple hospices, and you need to do your homework and figure out when the time comes, which hospice do you want to care for your loved one. So a couple of hospice homes, these are, they try so hard not to make it look like a hospital, try to make it very, very homey. Cute little soda shop, media room, kitchen, family room. They're beautiful. They're beautiful. And if you have a hospice in your area that has a hospice home, or multiple hospices that have hospice homes, I really encourage you to tour them and just see what what they have to offer. So in that 5,300 hospices across the country, about half are nonprofit, half are for-profit. The for-profits are gaining in percentage, and I'm not saying one's better than the other. I'm just saying it's two different models. Just be aware of that. Even the for-profits, some of them have donations or like funds set aside to help people that can't really afford it. And let's talk about that for a second. So some people, who thinks hospice is expensive? Okay, who thinks hospice is free? Who thinks you have to pay for hospice services, regardless? Okay. So some of you are right and some of you are wrong about all of that. And as a clinical person, we got to slap your hand because you guys are absolutely notorious to say hospice is free. Hospice is not free. Here's the thing. 65 or older or disabled for 2 years qualifies for Medicare. Medicare covers hospice services. It doesn't make it free. No, ma'am. They're going to get a statement, and on that statement it's going to say that Medicare covered their hospice care. So you don't ever say it's free. Hospice services are covered by Medicare. They're also covered by Medicaid, which is a financial need. People apply for Medicaid. So hospice services can be covered by Medicare and Medicaid. I don't qualify for either one. I happen to have private insurance. My private insurance covers hospice care, should I need it. And let's say I'm a bazillionaire. I won the lotto. I won the Powerball. Okay, I might not qualify for Medicare. I might not qualify for Medicaid, but I got money coming out of my ears, and I can private pay for my hospice services. On the flip side of that, let's say I'm homeless and I'm living under a bridge. Donations are going to cover my hospice services. And a beautiful story to highlight that is there was a homeless gentleman in my community. He'd been homeless for 20 years, and his backpack was immaculate. This man was so organized. It was beautiful. Anyway, he fell ill, and he wound up at the hospital, and he needed hospice care. So, of course, he did not trust many people, and it took a lot to convince him that every Monday we're going to meet you at this used car lot. He lived in the cemetery, but the car lot had let him shower there for 20 years. We're going to meet you at this car lot every Monday to assess you and make sure you're good. And if you don't show up one time, we're going to come find you. So every Monday, sure enough, even though he didn't trust a lot of people, he met with our nurse every Monday. One Monday, sure enough, he's not there, and she found him. And he was very, very ill. So he wound up at the hospice home. And his last wish was to spend one more night out on the street. And so we were able to make that happen in a very safe way. And then he came back to the hospice home, and that's where he died. So it's not free. It's not too expensive. It's covered. Hospice services are covered by Medicare, Medicaid, which that's your tax dollars at work. You've worked your whole life, and now that's the benefit you get from it, or through donations or your private insurance. Most private insurances. Okay, advanced care planning. So those of you that have not already been in a session about that, everybody we call it the 3Ds, decide, discuss, document. Everybody thinks the whole big thing is get the documents done and lock them in a lockbox, which you talked about the other day. The most important thing is to have the conversation. So let me just move on. Living will. Everybody thinks the living will is the be-all, do-all. Living will only covers life support, life-sustaining machines that keep you alive. So who can think of an example of that? Feeding tube. What else? Ventilator. What else? Artificial hydration. Okay. That's the only thing living wills cover. And a doctor can close the chart on a living will. The most important thing you need is a healthcare power of attorney. And a healthcare power of attorney is when you pick another living, breathing person to speak for you should you not be able to direct your own care. As long as you can direct your own care and you're decisional, that healthcare power of attorney sits on the table and collects dust. It's only when you can no longer make your own healthcare choices that the healthcare power of attorney comes in, and the doctor must do what you say because you are speaking as if you were the patient. And it's not decision by committee. So let's say you have 3 siblings. There's a primary. So let's say everybody's fighting, nobody can agree, does she go on ventilator or not? The healthcare power of attorney that's the primary, if there's a bunch of fighting going on, they're the ones that make the decision. Then you can have a number 2, because let's say we couldn't get Betty on the phone, so now we're going to talk to Sue, because we can get her on the phone. She lives a mile down the road. And then you could even have a 3rd. And ideally, that person is local. Doesn't have to be, but ideally they're local. And I talk about 4 characteristics. Let me see if it's on here. Nope. I got to do that before you read it. So 4 characteristics that I suggest you look into when you're figuring out who that person's going to be. Number 1, ask them. Once we talk about these 4 characteristics, ask them if it's okay with them, because there's so many people who said, well, I think. You didn't know you were your friend's healthcare power of attorney until the 11th hour. It's like, what? Okay, 4 characteristics. 1, they need to understand the options. And did I say that doesn't have to be family member? Okay. Need to understand the options. 2, they need to be able to stand up to what can sometimes be an overly aggressive medical community. So let's say you've got a doctor who wants to go for the 20th round of chemo, or let's cut off the 5th leg, or whatever. You've talked to your loved one. You know what? I've talked to her, and I know that's not what she wanted. So thank you, but no. So you're your patient, your loved one's advocate, to stand up to some doctors aren't that way, but some are. You know, they go to medical school to diagnose, treat, cure, and they have feelings, and it can hurt their feelings when they can't help you anymore. They can't fix it, so they're going to try to fix. So understand the options, stand up to what can sometimes be an overly aggressive medical community. 3rd is honor your values, not theirs. So I'm having lunch at a chamber function with a funeral director, and his wife are sitting across the table from me. He said he wanted to be cremated, and the wife says, well, not on my watch. And I said, who's your healthcare power of attorney? And he said, she is. And I said, sounds to me like you need to pick another healthcare power of attorney, because she's not going to follow your wishes. Okay, so it's got to be somebody that's going to honor your wishes, not theirs. And then lastly, it has to be somebody that's going to be strong enough to let go when it's time to let go. And that sometimes is not a family member. Sometimes it is. My healthcare power of attorney is not my son. It's my sister. She's a nurse, but I'm sure she'll be able to let go when it's time to let go. So those are the characteristics you need to think about when you're selecting who that person is. And then once you have it in your head who you want, please go ask them, are they okay with that? Are you willing to do this for me? And then they're not going to know your wishes just by osmosis. That's when you got to talk about it. You got to tell them. And advanced care planning is called advanced because you ideally do it in advance of the situation. You don't wait for the crisis. And at that point in time, it's scenario planning. You know, if this happens, do this. If that happens, do that. And it's just scenario planning. But you can get, and let me say this. Somebody tell me what time it is. 9:40. Okay. 10 more minutes. So, a lot of people don't like to talk about this. So what I recommend is you describe your perfect last day on the planet. So that is a pie in the sky, anything goes. So I'm going to share with you my perfect last day on the planet. I'm not particularly proud of this, but I'm very starstruck. So my last day is I'm going to go to the Oscars, and then I'm going to go to a dance hall and dance to Frank Sinatra, and then I'm going to go have a lobster and filet mignon dinner with champagne. And then I'm miraculously going to go from California to Winston-Salem. And when it's time to get in the bed, the dog's going to be on the bed. Somebody's playing Louis Armstrong in the background. It's a Wonderful World. That's my favorite song, and they can just put it on repeat. It's fine with me. Somebody's going to be baking a cobbler of some fashion in the oven so I can smell it. I have a list of people I want to be sure are there. And I have another list of people I want to be sure are not there, because I've been married twice, and I got a crazy cousin that I know will want to get in the bed with me, and that is not going to happen. And then I want somebody holding my hand around the clock. I don't care if they have to do round-the-clock gifts. That's what I want, somebody holding my hand. That's my perfect last day on the planet. If you just have that conversation with your loved ones, you're going to tell them things that are important to you that they did not know otherwise. I had that exact conversation with a bunch of little elderly people about 10 years ago, and this little lady starts crying, tears coming down her cheeks, and I said, "What? What's the matter?" What'd I say? And she said, "I want my bird on my shoulder." And I said, "Well, does your family know you want your bird on your shoulder?" And she said, "No." And I said, "Well, you promise me you will tell them tonight you want your bird on your shoulder." So that's a way to get it started. And then after you have shared your perfect last day, then say, okay, if the truck hits, always do this. Don't ever do that. If this happens, do this, do this. You can't describe everything, but you can give them enough of a sense of your values so that should you not be able to communicate your wishes, they have a real peace. And, I don't have to guess because she told me don't ever put me on a ventilator, or whatever the case may be. So is that helpful? Will you promise me you'll have these conversations with your folks? All right, I'm ordering a transfusion. We'll replace your B negative with B positive and see if that improves your mood. You know, doctors are going to try everything short of pulling a rabbit out of the hat. There's a really tacky hospice joke. Do you know why they put nails in coffins? To keep the docs out. You know, they're going to try everything. They are. And it's just from a place of love. Doctors, to keep the doctors out, They just want to help you so badly, and they feel like a failure if they can't help, and so it's a really hard thing for them. So many times if the doctor doesn't bring up hospice, a hospice evaluation, you bring it up. I have a friend who lost her husband just this summer. She said, "Do you think it's time for hospice?" And the doctor said, "Yes, I do." And you could just see the relief on his face. Thank you, Jesus, that she brought it up, because I couldn't get it out of my mouth. I mean, that's very common. She talked about advanced care planning. The MOST form, and where I'm from, it's called MOST. Some places it's POLST, MOST. MOST stands for Medical Order for Scope of Treatment. We call it the pink form, or POLST pinks as well in MOST. Okay, well, this is pink. Yeah, okay. Kind of like a DNR is yellow, that goldenrod yellow, and it travels with the patient. That's what happens with this. So let me tell you the difference between this and advanced care planning. Advanced care planning, you do it in advance of a serious illness. So all of us, 18 years or older, need advanced care planning documents, Living Well Healthcare Power of Attorney. The MOST form, or the POLST or MOLST, is when now there is a serious diagnosis with a potential life-limiting situation. And now we do need to step through all the specifics regarding this diagnosis of what you want, when you don't want it anymore. This is a doctor's order. Advanced directives are scenario planning long in advance of an issue. Now we got something going on, okay? Does everybody understand the difference? Okay. National, so you know how they say the only thing certain are death and taxes? So taxes are April 15. The National Healthcare Decisions Day is April 16. And if you go to nhdd.org, tons of resources. Some are state-specific. GOT Plans 123 is specific to North Carolina. Some of them are not state-specific, but it's a great resource. Before and after caring. Okay, we talked about the year of true generosity. Real quickly, and we don't have time to go into a lot of this, but after the loss, a lot of people say things that from a place of love and trying to be supportive, but it's just didn't help. Can anybody think of something that somebody said to you after a loss that you just wanted to knock their head off? What? Mike. Whoa.
It was meant to be.
Didn't that make you feel better?
They're in a better place.
Yeah. And you know what? A woman said to me when she heard they're in a better place, she said, you know what? Sitting right here next to me is the better place. So thank you, but no. Anybody else? Has somebody, like I lost my dad, and then let's say you lost your dad, and I say, I know how you feel. I lost my dad. Well, you know what? She could have had a fabulous relationship with her dad, and mine could have beat me to death every other day, right? You don't know how they feel. Within a family, I don't know how my sister and brother feel because they had their own relationship with my loved one, my parent. The best thing to say is, I am so sorry. I'm here for you. Can I bring you dinner on Thursday? Just be present. There's a beautiful thing about silence and just being present and just be there. Just be there. Don't try to fix it. It's just don't. For those that are on audio, I see the light at the end of the tunnel. I just hope it's not a train about to run me over. And I think caregivers feel like that quite often. Or people dealing with a potential loss, feel like that quite often. This is what to say, what not to say. And I know we're short on time, so, and you have access to these PowerPoints, so I'm just going to move on. I'm sorry. When they say, why'd this happen? I don't know. I don't know. So here we're going to end. So it's about how you live. The reason that is such a great tagline for hospice. There was a woman who, after dating her beau for 20 years, decided it's time to get married. So our volunteers put together a stretch limo and a red carpet, and they did a cake, and they had a wedding. Another woman, her family, they were all big swimmers. And so she was at the hospice home, and they were able to bring one of those portable pools to the back of the hospice home, and they were able to all get in the water together. Just lots of wonderful examples. This last one, there was a woman who had COPD. She was in palliative care for 2 years, hospice care for 4.5 months. A month and a half before she died, she said she wanted to go to the beach to drink tequila sunrise on the beach at sunset. And that was my mother. So here we are on the beach, me and my brother, and we're toasting with her tequila sunrise. And she was a little too wobbly to get down to the surf, so we found this big bucket, and we put ocean water in the bucket so she could stand in the ocean. That's hospice care. It's bucket list time. Like, what have you done, what have you not done that you now want to do? So the sooner you get involved with hospice, so they can manage your pain and manage your symptoms, so that you can feel like going and doing some things. We had a gentleman who said when his wife came into hospice care, he could take her to some cities that she'd never been to before because now she felt okay enough to do it. That's hospice care. Okay, how much time do we have? Until people walk in here. Okay, well, until they walk in here, because they don't start till 10, I like to talk about a good death and a bad death. And we all want a good death. to me, a bad death is when there are regrets. So is there anybody who would like to share if you had a good death experience, or if you're willing to share if you had a bad death experience? Okay, Mike.
So yesterday, Tina was referring to my talk yesterday. I had a friend who made me her medical power of attorney and also her durable power of attorney, but didn't tell me. And she was an older woman, friend of my mother-in-law's. She became critically ill. We were thrust into this role completely unknowingly. She hadn't had any conversation, so we were just completely guessing. When she died, because I'm from the Houston area, it was the week that Hurricane Harvey hit Southeast Texas. So the volume of Lake Michigan was dumped into our communities. I was stranded in Houston. My husband lived 5 minutes from the inpatient unit or hospice home where our friend had been evacuated because the home she was living in had been flooded. And she had sepsis, so she had what we call delirium or terminal agitation, which is a sort of challenging symptom for hospice personnel to manage. And I could not be there. And my husband went, he stayed with her, and he had some Frank Sinatra songs in his playlist on his phone. And so he put Frank Sinatra on because music is one of the things that's very soothing sometimes during death. And since hearing is typically the last sense to go when a patient dies, he put the music on and he set the phone right here by her on her shoulder, and he played that for her, and it eased her agitation until she passed away. So for me, in my scenario, the story in my head was I was going to be there for the death. I'm a hospice nurse, mother hospice. I can do all these things, and of course, none of that turned out the way we expected. But it was a good death because she wasn't alone, and he was able to do something that was very personal for her.
What I'm going to give you, because you're here, I'm gifting you that free PDF of my chapter in the book. And so that's what this form is about. So if you're willing to give me your email address, I do not spam. If you want to get on my newsletter, you must subscribe yourself. But I would, if you were interested in this chapter, and it's going to be much of what we talked about today. But thank you so much for being here. I really hope this was helpful, and God bless all of you and your caregiving.